Pretty ready to start. Yes, so we're going to record this and welcome everyone. My name's Neil Howman and I'll be your host for this event, Storytelling for Business. Just before I introduce you to our panelists, I'd like to just give everybody a very brief tour of the environment we're in, and I'll maybe explain why in a moment. Let me just share my screen just to show you on your browser where you are. We have a map of our event here, and you'll see on the left-hand column, we're all gathered on the main stage. And I very much hope you'll remain there while we have our presentation and panel discussion. But when that's over, we'd very much like you to stick around. Our guests have very generously also agreed to stick around, and we've created some rooms for both Chris and Angela and me, if you're desperate. But Chris and Angela, we've created spaces. So if you wanted more of a one-to-one or smaller group conversation with our panelists after the main discussion, we'd invite you to stick around. It's very easy to move. We're all in the main stage at the moment. You have two options on your browser. You can either click on the left-hand side on the room. So maybe you wanted to speak with Chris Foster after the discussion. Just click on Chris's name. You'll be invited to open zoom.us and then leave the current Zoom interface you're on and join essentially another Zoom room, and it will take you automatically into Chris's room. The other way of doing it is just simply to click on Chris's icon or Angela's icon, or just hang out in the lounge if you fancied a virtual cup of coffee, perhaps. Right, so let me just hop out. I'll remind you how to do that in the end, but without further ado, I think it's best to actually introduce you to our two very special guests. First of all, can I introduce Chris Foster? Chris Foster is VP of New Business Development at Modern Postcard. It's essentially a one-stop integrated marketing solutions firm, direct marketing solutions to businesses of all shapes, sizes, and forms. But I won't stop there. Chris has many strings to his bow. He also teaches brand strategy at UCSD Extension in San Diego, and has been doing so since about 2009, Chris, I think I'm right in saying. And also, Chris presents something called Take 20 for the Performance Driven Marketing Institute, PDMI, which is a bi-weekly 20-minute live video conversation tackling a wide range of performance marketing hot topics. And I'd highly recommend it. And we're going to put up some links for these various activities that Chris is involved in. So please check them out. They'll be in the chat. Feel free to click on those. And indeed, speak to Chris after the conversation in his own Chris Foster room, I think we can safely call it. Our second special guest is Angela Snell. Angela may be familiar to some of our guests here. Angela is a senior writer at 202 Communications and has been with 202 for over 10 years now. And welcome, Angela. I think it's fair to say Angela knows one or two things about helping 202's clients tell their stories in the B2B environment. And but Angela also has more than one string to her bow. She's a project manager for writers.tech, which is a tech copywriting service that is also offered. And I think it's got recently off the ground, isn't it, Angela? Really, it's quite a new venture.
We're picking up some steam, so.
And if you want to speak to Angela and find out more about writers.tech or the work she does for 202 Communications, again, please stick around afterwards and have a chat with her. And previously, it's best to mention as well that Angela was also an associate editor for Broadcast Engineering magazine. I think that's where you started, Angela, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's kind of where I got my foundation of working in this industry with the broadcasters and such. So
Wonderful. So you're both very welcome. The way we're going to structure this is I'm going to hand over to Chris in a moment, and Chris is going to give us a fairly brief presentation, 15-20 minutes, about storytelling for business. And then after that, we might pick up on a few of the points that Chris covers, and we'll bring Angela in, see what her take is on things, and then obviously questions. You can put them in the chat function here, or as I said, please use the environment that we've got here, and you can maybe carry on the conversations with Angela or Chris if you so wish. So without further ado, quite enough from me, I'll hand over to Chris. So Chris, please take it away.
Got it. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And thank you all for coming. And we're delighted to share some of these ideas with you. And so the presentation, it's going to be pretty quick. And it's called Storytelling for Business. And one of the questions that a lot of people have is, I know that they've heard about storytelling and marketing, and that's not necessarily a new concept. But the question is, how does it apply to business, especially how does it apply to B2B? And why does B2B story matter, right? I need to sell stuff. And the premise really is that there's a human interaction and there's a human quality to any type of engagement, even if you're purchasing software or some type of business product. You're not selling to fire hydrants or pickles, you're selling to people. And for people, storytelling is one of these things where it cuts across all cultures and all time, because there's one thing we can all agree on. Everybody, in any time, in any country, in any location, for the last 100,000 years, every human being loves great stories with compelling characters. So anyway, here's me. Neil did that. And let's jump into it. So like we said, everybody loves a story. Every single person on this call, when they were younger, had stories read to them by either parents or guardians or loved ones or teachers. There's some magic quality. 100,000 years ago, we were around a campfire, listening to stories. Now, settle down, have a book, watch Netflix, but we love stories. Human beings just love it. And so this is one story that I have where it's called A Story of Conversion. So I teach a class like Neil had talked about, and I do a field trip every year. And I take them to different stores. And this one gal, had never been to Lush before. And so we went in and she's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And she bought something, a little thing, and she left Lush and heard about their story of handmade goods. And, the way that it's packaged, it almost looks like a market, like a farmer's market, and their, eco-friendly policies. And she says, oh my gosh, I'm a total convert. I was like, well, that's a really interesting word. Why'd you use the word convert? And conversion, sure, there's a business conversion, right? Yeah, I need more conversions on my leads. But the convert also has religious overtones, right? I convert to Buddhism. I convert, or not Buddhism, but I convert to Judaism, right? Or I convert to Christianity. Convert creates a sense of belief, right? I'm gonna have a belief in something. And that's what she did. She left Lush not just being a customer, she left Lush being a believer. And what Lush understands is that you invite your customers to believe in what you do, right? So this is their Get Naked campaign where, they welcome these ideas, they welcome different communities, but they want their customers to believe in what they believe in too. And I'm sure most folks know a guy named Simon Sinek, and he talks about, making sure that you believe in what you believe and your customers believe the same thing. And it's especially true with Generation Z. In Generation Z, more Gen Zs support businesses who align with their beliefs and causes. And members of Gen Z are also willing to take that support away. More than 65% would stop purchasing or supporting a brand that didn't have the same values. And why is that important in the B2B space? Well, not only are the customers going to be Gen Z, they're going to be the largest consumer group in 2025, but also Gen Z is going to be 30% of the workforce, which means that B2B decision makers are going to be looking for business brands that also align with their beliefs and their causes. Right now, one of the things that we all know, this is widely cited, is that we're overwhelmed with marketing messages, thousands of marketing messages a day, display ads, Facebook scrolls, etc. And we're also distracted. Users spend about 3+ hours per day on their phone, right? Hopefully you're not on your phones right now, but there's a lot of time that we spend on these devices. It's become kind of part of the daily habit and pattern and behavior of our lives. There we go. And so the reason that I say that is, I was doing some research on working memory and intelligence for this presentation and others. And just look at this. Look at all those distractions. Show notifications, block allow, the social contacts, an ad at the bottom, an ad on top of an ad on the right, an ad in the upper right. And really, I'm just trying to look at the content in green. There's a lot of distractions around just looking at content and just working and living in the world. And same is true with Facebook, right? So this is a really interesting story, right? Yeah, you do remember things better when you write them down by hand. And I might dive into that, but I might just keep scrolling. And then I see this ad from LL Bean, which is awesome. But then I see a photo of my neighbor's dog with a beer. But I can skip right over that ad for LL Bean. And I love LL Bean. But it's really easy to skip. And if it says down for anything, and I see that, I'm not exactly sure what that means. Yeah, I get it. It's down, right? It's a down jacket, and they're down for anything because they're going to the beach in the wintertime. But I didn't see that real quick, right? And so as I start scrolling, I can miss that stuff. And so the big question that brands have in B2B brands is, how do you get customers to listen to you amidst the field of all of this distraction? Well, the good news is that the answer is that everyone loves a story. Right. And that has continued. And so thinking about not necessarily communications or messages, and thinking about how do I tell my story really changes the perspective of your entire marketing approach. Now, our brains are hardwired to respond to stories. It's just basically packed into our physiology. And when they've done some studies, and when subjects read a descriptive metaphor rather than plain text, sensory receptors in the cortex lit up. I don't know if anyone is a Star Trek Next Generation fan, but there was a marvelous episode where they see this alien, group, and they only speak in metaphor, right? So they're trying to understand, because all their metaphors are from their own stories, but they say things like, when someone understands, his eyes are open, or if they want to go somewhere, they say, with sails unfurled. Right, they move ahead, right? But they talk in metaphor because that's how they understood each other. And what cognitive science has long recognized narrative as a basic organizing principle of memory. Accuracy is not the main objective, but really coherence is, right? So on the left, as a baby, this young girl might see mom and dad in the kitchen, right? She's in the high chair, mom and dad are in the kitchen, they're cooking eggs and bacon, maybe it's a scrambled egg, maybe it's not, and a little peck on the cheek, and they're all eating dinner together or breakfast together. Doesn't matter if it's if it's a scrambled egg, it doesn't matter if it's bacon or ham or an English muffin or toast. That's not it. Accuracy of that breakfast isn't important. What was important is the memory and the coherence of a happy family sharing breakfast in the morning, right? And the story of that. And we need these stories to organize our thoughts. This is one of my favorite images, because if you look at this and I ask you at the end of the presentation, hey, how many arrows are there? How many antelope are there? That's not really important. But what's important is that figure in the upper right. Who is that figure? Is that figure perhaps the boy on his first hunt? And this is the story of the first hunt and how important that is for the tribe, right? The tribe's survival depends on the next generation learning how to hunt. And here's the moment when this young boy is exposed to the hunt for the first time. That's the significance of this moment. Not how many arrows or antelope there are, but the boy's first hunt. And when you start delivering messages as a story, it's 22 times more memorable than just facts. And we use stories to reach the brains of your customers That's the whole idea of this. There's a biological reason that stories connect so deeply with us. So I'm not a brain scientist, but for the purposes of this presentation, this is how we think about this, right? There's the cerebral cortex, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. The cerebral cortex is responsible for words, reasoning, and planning. Amygdala is emotion, and long-term memory is to the hippocampus, right? But what I love about this picture is look at the amygdala and the hippocampus, where emotion and long-term memory live. They actually are right next to each other physiologically. They're almost touching, right? They're really in the core of the brain. And everybody in this, I say, everyone in this presentation remembers their first meaningful kiss, right? Because there's an emotion and a memory that's packed in that moment, even though it was a long time ago. I don't even remember a story that I read in the New York Times 2 days ago, right? Words, reasoning, and planning. That doesn't necessarily come back as easily as these big emotional and memorable moments, but that's part of the brain, right? And so emotional responses to what we read may help determine what we remember. And that's really important because it's the emotion and the memory. And the beautiful thing about that from a physiological standpoint is that stories are both memorable and emotional. So this is Where the Wild Things Are. And Max goes off. And the whole story is, if you've ever read it, it starts small and it opens up to a big double truck spread in the middle, and then it closes down. And really, it's a story of a temper tantrum, but the safety that the child has to have that temper tantrum because he's safe at home. And this is the middle of the story where it is the big temper tantrum. It's where the wild rumpus begins. I read this book when I was 5. I remember it so well. I remember all of it so well because it's that emotion and memory. And the good news is that to tap into that using stories is great because stories have a simple structure that all humans understand. We all do. We're going to talk about it. It begins with a hero, right? Carol Danvers, Elizabeth Bennet, Max, right? They face a villain, right? Be it Darth Vader or Fish or Jan Ra, or in the lower right in the Grapes of Wrath, the big villain was not just the police. And the Grapes of Wrath is a story about the Joad family moving from Oklahoma to California during the Dust Bowl years in America. And it's their story, but it's also the story of other people like them, of the hundreds of thousands of people who moved. And the villain isn't necessarily the cop or the mean farmer. The villain is a system that's bigger than they are. Darth Vader is a villain, but the big villain is the dark side of the Force. It's a bigger villain. And those are the things that we really tap into because it makes other people feel like it's not their fault, but they're a part of something larger that's going to be challenging them. Well, the hero, thankfully, even though they oversee this villain, they meet a mentor. They always meet a mentor. Hero embarks on a journey, and they undergo a transformation. It's the same structure, right? Carol Danvers has to go through a journey to become Captain Marvel, right? Max has to go to Land of the Wild Things to come back home and be safe. There's always this transformation at the end. There's a hero, a villain, a mentor, the journey, and the final transformation. It's a very simple structure. So the question you're going to have is like, Foster, that's awesome. It's a great movie. These are great stories, but how does it apply to business? Well, this is the structure. The hero is your customer, period. Not yourself, but the customer. The villain, the challenge. The mentor is you, the business. The journey is that service or product arrangement. And finally, that transformation is just that transformation, right? So we're going to talk about that quickly. There are 3 kinds of transformation that people go through. One is a functional, so that customers live better. The other is emotional, so that customers feel better. And the last and most powerful of all is the moral transformation. So customers become better. They're more than they were before. In the B2B world, there are very few moral transformations, unless you're moving to a sustainable type of B2B service that radically helps to make not only you, but your business and customers better than they were before. Most transformations are going to be functional and emotional in the B2B space. Again, here's the structure. And the question is, well, how does this play out in the real world? So let's talk about a story of problem solving, right? So this is Zebo. It's a one-stop shop for rental property finances. I'm a landlord. I've got a bunch of apartments. Oh, it's such a pain. got to get renters. I've got to get a spreadsheet. Who's paid? Who hasn't paid? Do I have to get new renters? Am I up with my bills? Am I making sure that maintenance is done? It's a hassle and it's really hard to organize. So this is the creative brief that we wrote. And look at this, bonk, story structure. It's so helpful just from a practical standpoint to embed the story structure into the creative brief. The hero, he's the landlord with more than 3 properties to manage. The challenge, administration and manages of the finances. Mentor, Zebo, it's world-class software. The journey, it's free, easy registration and login. The transformation is functional and emotional. It's functional because it's easy tools and it's free to start, but it's emotional because it reduces the stress. And again, emotions are still part of that business buying process. Even if there's a job to do with the service, there's still emotions, mitigating risk, feeling more assured, a belief that this is going to work. These are all emotional aspects to buying any kind of B2B service. And so this is how we played it out, right? We use that creative brief, we use the story structure. It makes it so much easier to write the copy. Actually, I'll go back and you can see on the right-hand side, the front side headline, right? And the CTA and all the different phrases that we use, bonk, they're played right in there, right? Managing rental finances from the palm of your hand. Okay, so that's actually, and then landlords like you, right? You're the hero. Managing many properties have a lot to contend with, especially during the pandemic. That's the villain. Zebo is a remarkably simple suite. That's the mentor. And then it kind of goes through the journey about all the things that you do with it. Using the story structure really helped it make it easy to write the copy in an effective way. So the key takeaway, story structures are the fastest and most effective way to engage your customers with an authentic message. It takes work because you have to work through your own story, but it's absolutely worth it. And some resources that Neil had talked about, building a story brand, I highly recommend it. It's an easy read. It's a great read. Everybody on your marketing team can digest it, and then you can build your own stories. They've got some tools, etc. Winning the Story Wars is also great. And if you really want to dive in, the Mama Jama, the sources of it all, Joseph Campbell, Hero of a Thousand Faces, stitches and knits together mythologies from across cultures. And it really talks about that structure of the story and how it's ubiquitous across mankind. So I'm going to stop my share. I'm going to turn it over to Neil. And that's the quick presentation to get the conversation started.
I'll unmute myself. I was absolutely stunned by that, Chris. I mean, just how quickly you covered all the key points, because I wanted to say to everybody, there is the long form version of the original Storytelling for Business presentation, which I'd highly recommend. More great examples and just brilliant to see. Can everybody hear me okay? Because I've got a sign up here which says something. Yeah, just going to move that to one thing. Right, so that thank you so much for that, Chris. So much to dig into there, but let's just explore some of the sort of key topics. What really struck me about the whole presentation, Chris, is getting back to that sort of human aspect to things. It's integral to us as human beings to tell stories, but perhaps playing slightly devil's advocate in a B2B space and perhaps in the B2B tech space. Mm-hmm. I sometimes feel that there's a danger that the story, the full engagement can be somewhat overshadowed by, facts, figures, fairly sort of dry information. Mm-hmm. So that really stood out for me. But Angela, I wanted to perhaps just pick up on something that Chris covered quite early on in the conversions story. A couple of things that sort of stuck with me a bit, and perhaps again playing slightly devil's advocate. You in a tech business. Decisions about trying to do business with people who believe what you believe perhaps go a little bit down the list, would you say? Or with a younger generation coming in, is it becoming more important to clients that you've noticed that actually you know, the ethical considerations and indeed the moral considerations that may not have loomed so large in the past? Are they becoming more important, Angela, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the, big trends that we're seeing in our video industry right now is kind of like a focus on sustainability and green practices. We're seeing a lot of our clients right now that are embracing that and really wanting to kind of do their part to reduce the carbon footprint of video streaming. And I would say, that really speaks to the next generation of buyers, because just like Chris mentioned, that we're trying, a lot of companies right now are trying to, show how they're engaged with issues that this generation of millennials and Generation Z, what do they care about? So, climate change is a huge one. We've seen studies, there was a study recently by Pew Research that found Generation Z is really engaged with the issue of climate change right now. And so they're, going to see some of these companies that are also embracing what they care about, and that matters.
Yeah, and I think we're going to have a link. We've got a link that we can put into the chat on that piece of research. It's a fascinating piece of research. Chris, you probably get a sort of broader view across a whole number of verticals here. Obviously, you picked up on that point and mentioned that point about, the Generation Z and millennials coming in and being much more engaged with, the Lush example was great in the sort of B2C space. But have you seen an uptake of that, an upsurge over the past 5-10 years that you've been, engaging, teaching people? What are you seeing across the piece?
Well, I think that where the new generation is more tuned in to becoming part of something. So they're on the consumer side, they're looking for more than just transactions. They're looking for an authentic engagement, right? They're choosing brands that tell the world and tell themselves and define who they are, right? And the beautiful thing about the surge of e-commerce brands is that there are a lot more niche brands to choose from, where you can say, oh, I am connected to Cocoa Kind, for example. It's a skincare product line. They're fantastic. It's, this woman has really done it right. They only use real people for their models, and it's a wonderful niche brand that has a devoted following. And what brands are really looking for, I think, is that devoted following. What I say, I teach a lot and I mention a lot is you don't have to be a big brand to be a great brand, right? Great brands authentically connect. Doesn't matter what size you are. And those great brands that authentically connect are the most successful ones, rather than just, and usually, of course, the sales follow, right? On the B2B side, like I said, there's still emotion as a part of it. And one of the emotions that happens often in B2B purchasing is risk, right? If I'm purchasing a piece of technology, there is an emotional component of risk and belief, right? You engage with a tech company because you believe that they can offer a solution for your business that's going to help your business move forward in a better way. The risk is that you made the wrong choice, right? So there's an emotional component to any of these buying processes. It's not just a CFO decision saying, well, it's going to balance out. That's not true. Ask any CMO who's buying a piece of technology. There's a risk and an emotional quality that goes with that.
Yes, sorry, Chris, just picking up on that point actually segues quite nicely into another point that you made about how we're overwhelmed with messages. Well, I know Angela is getting ready for a major trade show in the area that she works in about a week and a half. And, the people you are perhaps trying to help your clients reach are competing with an awful lot of noise of similar sort of messages, etc. So I suppose a question for you, Angela, is really about how you start to try and help the clients you work with their story, with their messaging, about how you start to get them to cut through the noise. I guess it speaks to that authenticity point, Chris, but how would you go about that, Angela, or make a start with that?
I think the most important thing that we try to do is to really find the story of how does this piece of technology or this solution help a specific business. That's really what we want the customer to see at the end, because there can be different benefits for a variety of different customers. So one of the ways that we try to do that at 202 is case studies. That is a great way to really share the story of our clients and how they're helping their customers. So, just Chris talked just a minute ago about how do you trust with this buying decision? Well, if you're reading a case study that says, CNN is using this piece of technology, maybe you start to build up a little bit of trust there. You see that there's a major brand who's using it. So we use case studies a ton to try to get that story across. We talk about and we follow that structure kind of that Chris talked about, was identifying who the customer is, telling their story, and then what's their challenges, right? We dig into those challenges and kind of do a deep dive of those, and then it goes to what the solution is. Okay, right? So then we're going to talk about that technology and how it's solving those challenges.
Well, and I guess that I'd like to sort of revisit this. So that speaks absolutely into the sort of the hero, the villain, that you were mapping out, Chris. But maybe I'm going to revisit that slightly. The emotional sense of it, Angela, would, if I was on the outside thinking, hang on, this is a piece of technology. How isn't that more of a challenge in certain areas of the B2B space? You're talking to people who are possibly have quite a deep engineering knowledge, and they might want to go, forget about how I emotionally feel about this. Does it work? But
I hear what you're saying, and part of that challenge, for us is kind of making sure that there's a good mix between the technical details and the story, right? So a lot of times I find that using quotes in these case studies is a good storytelling technique. Writing quotes from the customer's perspective, not just following a data sheet, a bunch of features of a product, but telling that customer story through quotes and how they're using the technology.
Yeah, and Chris, I mean, the idea of testimonials and things. What's your take on that in your experience? I mean, they surely are a great way to sort of round the story out and deepen the connection.
Absolutely. And I think Angela was very insightful in terms of linking how she structures a case study into the storytelling structure. I think that's brilliant. And also what she does is when she does that on a really deep story level, she's showing that the hero returns from the journey and is transformed and successful, right? Where, the idea of the hero always has to take the first step for her or himself, right? They have to be called to action. They have to do it themselves. They can't be pushed. But when they go into the forest and they come back to the tribe and they are transformed, they've shown that the journey is successful and that they made it, and that you can transform too, right? So Angela's description of a testimony or a case study brings that to light and shows the human quality of you can trust this, right? It's credible. A lot of people will end up saying, well, gosh, testimonials are just social proof. Fine. Whatever you want to label it is fine. Mm-hmm. But the important thing is, the reason they're so compelling is because it's the successful story of the hero transformed. That's why it resonates in our mind.
Yeah, and on first viewing, when you're introducing those elements, you might think, oh, this looks very sort of all rather fancy and all rather B2C, but really, the example you gave, Chris, really sort of rooted that. And Angela, I mean, you must have worked on many case studies over the years, and so when you saw that from Chris, how did that chime in with your personal process?
Yeah, and I totally agree with Chris about, making sure that the customer who's using the technology is the hero really of that story, because You know, we kind of redid some of our case studies for our clients about a year ago, and we were really looking at, you know, revamping them to try to bring in more of a storytelling technique instead of just, you know, this is our solution and these are the benefits. And what we found during that was, wait, you know, a lot of these case studies, it's making the client as the hero because we're just talking about their technology. What we need to do is really flip it on its head, right? We need to talk about how the customer is using the solution and how it transformed their business. That's the story.
Do you find that it has a transformative effect on the people, you know, the client you're working with? I mean, to give them a different perspective, and it starts off a sort of thought process that hadn't quite occurred to them in the, you know, previously.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they were on board 100%, and we've seen it's just what we were able to produce at the end was so much richer. So yeah, it worked out.
Wonderful. Chris, just one thing, and you explained it very well, but it comes back to that point you make about coherence above accuracy, if I quote you correctly. Now, I would say that could be slightly contentious in the B2B space if you're talking with rather specific, you know, technology or whatever. So perhaps just for the sake of everyone, and everyone, have a think about your questions. So I'll be trying to open it out for questions soon. And as I say, we'll, you know, you can come and speak to Chris and Angela on a more one-to-one basis. But yeah, just that one, Chris.
It's a great insight, Neil, in terms of understanding the philosophy and the point of view, right, about this. And so I'll say it this way. Way back in the Wayback Machine, I was in fine arts school and I was in a drawing class, and Barry Shockman was my teacher. He was about 4'8", smoked 20,000 cigarettes a day, only ate crackers out of the Bronx. Incredible guy. Anyway, so we had to draw.
Like me. I do that.
So we had to draw these figures, and he said, "Look, I can teach you how to draw, right? Charcoal and blah blah blah." He said, "But most importantly, I have to teach you how to see." Right? Because you're actually putting charcoal on paper and you're trying to draw a three-dimensional figure. You're trying to make it look like it goes back in space. And you have to see it in order to know if you're doing it. And that was the first thing. And so the question of coherence and accuracy is you have to see it in terms of, are you telling the large coherent story, but then supporting it with the accurate facts on a B2B side. And the communications or the story could be episodic in some ways, where you could tell, kind of to Angela's point, this is what happens to these heroes when they go on this journey. This is their transformation when you buy this technology. And they're like, okay, that you got me intrigued. Emotionally, I'm kind of intrigued. So why should I believe you? Great question. And then you have those accurate facts and those features that support the story, but then it goes back to the story again and why these features actually matter. How does it make your life better? How does it make your business better? What job are these features actually doing? And then get more facts. You know, there's a local San Diego business called ClickUp, and it's a technology thing. Company. I shouldn't be dismissive of that. It's a technology company, and what they're doing is they've got some business software, business management software, and they said save 1 day a week. That's their promise. And you're like, save 1 day a week? I get a whole new work day? And so it's like, okay, well, that's pretty interesting. And then it kind of goes through what the reason behind it, but they hook you in with that first coherent piece. And then, Neil, to your point, in the B2B space, of course, you have to have the accuracy with your features.
I've got a question here from Alan. Thank you, Alan, for that. And I'm going to, I think I'm going to come to you first on this one, Angela. Alan was interested in how we incorporate data into storytelling. And Angela, obviously, one of your key jobs is getting data in there, but again, packaged in a way that's engaging, cuts through an awful lot of the background noise and the noise from competitors and everything. So, any thoughts on how you go about that? I'm sure you've covered it previously, but just on your process there.
Okay, so when we're talking about data, are we talking about data about like the technology itself or like research?
Yeah,
I guess one thing that I like
really,
to do, sometimes like up front in a story, I like to do some industry research. So if we're talking about video streaming, I'll do some research that will show, video streaming is accelerating. The study shows that, in 5 years, it's $1 billion industry or something. Okay, so that's one way that I try to bring a little bit of data research into my upfront story. And then secondarily, I would say if we're talking about the solution or the technology itself, I would wait a little bit to kind of get to some of those data points about the technology. You need to start the story first by introducing, if it's a case study, like we were talking about, who the customer is, what's their story, who are they, where did they come from, right? Like, and what are their goals for their business? That's how you start the story, and then you introduce some of those more techie points later on once you've gotten your audience hooked on the story.
excellent. Well, if anybody here would like to discuss case studies with Angela afterwards, then she'll be around, and she has her own place you can go. Yeah, so Chris, any more thoughts on how you would take, something that's quite complex, quite involved, quite technical, but anything you want to add to what Angela's shared?
Yeah, no, I think that Angela has that balance of story and features really well laid out. And I think that my advice is to go through this, just truly do the exercise. It's on a whiteboard, it's on a piece of paper, whatever it is, just truly write it down. Hero, villain, mentor, journey, transformation, just go through it. Just dig in, right? And if you would say, what would be the storyline of that we would want to tell, right? If it was going to be a movie, if it was going to be a story that you would tell rather than just kind of sell, that's a good way to see it differently. And again, so much of this is about seeing it. And the danger of saying, oh, case study, got it, testimonial, got it, is that you can do rote exercise of that application, but that's going to not be as deep and authentic as if you would take the time to really think about the story process and what we talked about today and with this structure.
Excellent. Chris, thanks very much for reminding me that you have an important engagement in about 15 minutes time. So I'm going to thank you both very much indeed for your input. And I'm going to just suggest to everyone that there's a few more minutes, Chris, if you could spare us some, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely.
So please, if you've got any questions, if you haven't got any questions, please connect with Chris. His LinkedIn is in the comments here, Angela as well, LinkedIn or connections in the comments, various resources you can visit there. But if I bring this sort of the formal panel discussion to a close, and thank you both very, very much indeed for your time. If you'd be kind enough to stay around for a few minutes.
Absolutely.
Everybody, please take full advantage of the live platform we've got here. So Angela and Chris will be in their respective rooms. I'm sending them to their rooms because they've been.
Oh, you're going to send me? Okay, very good.
Very, very badly behaved. Yeah, we'll stop the recording now. And thank you so much. And
thank you.
Thanks so much.